Thank you again for joining today's discussion on building protective communities for Black children and families. My name is Mavis Sanders. I am Senior Research Scholar of Black Children and Families at Child Trends, and I have the distinct pleasure of moderating today's discussion. Before we get started, I would like to share some basic information with you. First, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of Akinde Akande, who is Senior Policy Analyst at Child Trends, as well as Megan Trinan, who is the Senior Research Communications Analyst for Child Trends. From managing the technology to communicating with our panelists, as well as our audience members, and from also helping to develop the agenda. They have worked so hard to bring us together today, and I want to acknowledge all of that hard work and to thank them. We also have a couple of housekeeping items that we want to share. First, please know that this presentation is being recorded. It will be uploaded to YouTube and shared using a variety of social media. So please keep an eye out for the link to the recording and share that with your networks. Also, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see that closed caption is available to you. And as we go through this conversation, please enter your questions in the chat box. Megan will manage that chat box, and we will look forward to sharing those questions with our panelists during the Q&A portion of today's webinar. Finally, to provide some context for today's discussion, I want to say a few words about Child Trends' new applied research agenda on Black children and families. We formally announced this new applied research agenda last year in 2022. We talked about the goals of building understanding of the diversity of Black children and families, contextualizing their experiences within systems and institutions, and producing evidence that informs policies and practices to promote the well-being of Black children and families. In all of this work, we are using a racial equity approach that is intersectional, asset-based, and culturally responsive. Over the past year, we engaged in 3 steps to identify priorities for this applied research agenda. We have reviewed the existing knowledge base, sharing that information with you on our website through blogs and briefs. We have been engaging with the community stakeholders to make sure that this work is as relevant and responsive as possible. And then we have gone back to our unique strengths and resources as the premier organization conducting research on child and family well-being to ensure that what we contribute makes a difference. What we have shared all of these steps in the brief that is here on this PowerPoint and also in the chat box. We have Kende who will be placing links to the various articles and briefs that I mentioned in the chat box. So please take a look there. And if you have not read these, we encourage you to do so. And you can find all of these materials on the Child Trends website. So through that 3-step process, 2 priorities for our multi-year research will have emerged, one being Black family cultural assets, and the other being protective community resources for Black children and families, which is the focus of today's conversation. We have begun that exploration looking at neighborhood amenities, sidewalks, parks, recreation centers, libraries, and their effects on Black children and youth. We have found that even though these amenities are important to positive child development, most Black children in the US do not live in neighborhoods that have all 4 of these amenities. But we also have found that when Black youth are exposed to all 4 of these amenities, they are more likely to flourish. And so given that, we are very lucky to have with us 5 leaders who are engaged in the work of promoting protective communities for Black children and families, and indeed all children and families here in the United States in the field of education, health, youth development, housing, as well as infrastructure and community development. So I am very pleased at this point to introduce to you the panelists for today in alphabetical order. First, Amanda Cologne Smith is Community Engagement Director at Rebuild in the city of Philadelphia, a mayoral initiative focused on capital improvements to parks, recreation centers, and libraries. She works with nonprofit partners, residents, and stakeholders to guide over $400 million investment into 72 selected sites across the city. She previously served as executive director at a small neighborhood development corporation in St. Louis, where she worked with 4 South City neighborhoods on environmental justice, affordable housing, and neighborhood planning projects. She is an urbanist geographer, motivated by the promise of building vibrant communities for all, ones that center youth, integrate arts and culture, and cultivate equitable outcomes. Next on our panel is Clinton Lacey. Clinton Lacey is the president and CEO of the Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement, also known as CM3. This movement focuses on supporting credible messenger mentors who share similar life experiences with current justice-involved young people. Previously, Mr. Lacey served as director of the District of Columbia Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services and deputy commissioner of the New York City Probation Department. Other positions held by Lacey over his 30-year career include project manager with the W. Hayward Burns Institute, director of the Youth Justice Program at Vera Institute of Justice, and associate executive director of Friends of Island Academy, which serves 16 to 24-year-olds at Rikers Island in New York City. Next, we have Terrence Moore. Terrence Moore is Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Maternal and Child Health Programs, known as AMCHIP. AMCHIP's mission is to advance the health of women, children, youth, families, and communities by strengthening governmental public health and deepening community partnerships through a health equity lens. AMCHIP's vision is a nation committed to the unfettered well-being of women, children, youth, and families and communities so that they thrive. Terrence has spent his career managing the nexus between organizational management and human rights advocacy for racial, sexual orientation, and gender equality. Terrence recently led AMCHIP's efforts to update the organization's strategic plan and implementation plan through 2027, and we're excited to see what results from these initiatives. Dr. Elisa Odunya is a depth psychologist researcher, community engagement facilitator, policy analyst, and writer dedicated to addressing the national racial reckoning and homelessness crisis through fostering cultures of belonging. Her dissertation research focused on the development of Osun consciousness, a modality that creates a sense of belonging for Black people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles. Dr. Elisa believes that communities have the ability to overcome historic tensions and harm and become beloved communities where all members thrive. And finally, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Ronald Walker. Ron has served in the noble profession of education for 5 decades. He has been a teacher, vice principal, staff and program developer, and the founding executive director for the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color, also known as COSBOC. Ron believes that COSBOC's mission to advance the affirmative social, emotional, cultural, and academic development of boys and young men of color is imperative for career and life success. He is also the author of a memoir dedicated to his mother entitled Dolores' Dream. And you can have a link to this book that I cannot wait to begin in our chat box as well. And so with those introductions and the panelists' patience, which I am very thankful for, we can get started with today's conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, I have been so looking forward to this conversation. And so let's just dig in and begin with the first question. And the first question, Amanda, if you can get us started, what is your vision for a protective community for children and families broadly? And why is it important for us to focus on creating these conditions for Black children and families specifically?
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. As mentioned in the intro, I work for the City of Philadelphia with the Rebuild Initiative. And so our work fits within the entire set of public services that the City of Philadelphia is trying to infuse into every neighborhood and uplift. Rebuild in particular is a signature initiative of Mayor Jim Kenney. It was his vision in coming into office to make the most bold investment into neighborhoods and neighborhood infrastructure in the city's history. And so we are on track to invest over $450 million, may creep higher in terms of the additional fundraising that we've been able to do with local and state grants and private philanthropy to invest in 72 sites that were selected in partnership with City Council that reflect every corner in every neighborhood in the city of Philadelphia. When those sites were selected, there were a range of demographic data, community conditions that were ranging from looking at poverty, asthma, obesity, diabetes, really trying to figure out where can we make sure that we come to serve the physical needs, but also the social needs in an urgent way. And so just looking at sort of what we call a walk shed, 10-minute walking radius around the sites that were selected. Over 43 out of the 72 sites have African-American population of 40% or higher. The average across the city, African-American population is about 40%. So that means in total, over 60% of rebuild sites are focused in Black neighborhoods. And, it's sort of, it dovetails with all these other social issues that Black children and families are facing. And so aligning with what's called the Strengthening Families Framework, sorry, using some additional terms because, in engagement, we're in the ground, but the framing around why we do this work and the way that we do it focuses also on those protective factors for parental resilience and youth resilience. And that's from social connections, looking at my notes, I apologize. Social connections, thinking about those coaches, those permit holders who are doing activities in our rec centers that build bridges and bonds for children, create that concrete need for support in times of needs. A lot of our rec centers during the pandemic turned into virtual learning hubs when kids needed access to the internet. Our parks, our rec centers and libraries are a full part of the fabric, the village that supports our children. And so the city is fully committed to investing in these sites and really, the projects range from $500,000 up through $20-30 million projects happening all across the city.
Great. We look forward to learning so much more about Rebuild during this conversation. And I'm going to pose the same question to you, Clinton. When you think about protective communities, what do you envision? And why is it particularly important for us to think about protective communities for Black children and families?
Thank you, Mavis, and thank you to all. I'm really honored to be on in the company of the distinguished panel and audience. It's really for us and taps into some of what Amanda was saying, just listening to her from a mayor's office vision and perspective thinking about and investing in and building projects that build wellness, right? And so I think about this issue, the larger issue, as a vision of and a walk towards community or village wellness and empowerment. Because I think that the empowerment piece is what ultimately can achieve and sustain the wellness that the village craves, needs, deserves, and has the expertise and the experience, I believe, and the wherewithal to create with an adequate level of investment and support. And so the big idea for us in our work that connects to this conversation is achieving a shift, right? A fundamental shift, huge though, I think of great proportions in terms of the implications, from the current level of reliance and investment on systems, formal government systems, et cetera, to a drastic increase of investment and reliance on community actors, leaders, organizations, people, right? And so to achieve that shift, I think requires a shift in thinking and identity and vision on the part of systems themselves. No longer as the sole or even primary source of care and wellness, right? But as facilitators and investors and supporters of a process that really achieves community empowerment. For us, we have sort of tried to concretize that idea, that larger idea, in the form of our work that we call credible messenger mentoring. And it's really about investing in the village that we've all agreed it takes to raise healthy children and families. Investing in the village capacity to do that, to care for itself, to nurture itself, to provide the guidance, support, discipline, even in the question of justice, right? That the village has a much larger role that it can and should play to achieve the goals of wellness, safety, and ultimate empowerment. So we invest in and support the work of investing in quote unquote non-traditional leaders, those perhaps who were least likely or so often thought only as the problem and not the solution, people who themselves who have been most impacted by the justice system, but not just formerly incarcerated people who have been marginalized in other ways in the community, right? Direct and indirect impact of justice systems, homelessness, substance abuse, various issues that we could list, the long list of disparities that our communities suffer. But in those communities, in those very people themselves, and who we've often seen as the problem, is great expertise, is great perspective, is amazing talent and commitment and a unique positioning, we believe, if we invest in that and leverage that they could have tremendous impact. In our work, it's been to engage the front lines of people who are most impacted by the justice system. Young people, young adults, and others who are cycling in and out of the criminal justice system, and the ripple impact that has on families and on the community. So leveraging this unique perspective, this ability to form trusting relationships, and then to co-navigate with people through a process of healing, of restoration and connection, and advocacy for the types of resources that are needed. Credible messengers play this incredible role. And so I think it's an example of work that can and is being done to invest in the village, credible messengers as representatives of the village, not the only ones, but key members who have for so long been left out of the conversation, who are now at the table in the mix, engaging people, and not just people impacted by systems, also the systems themselves. And I would just say one other thing, maybe at this point, we talk about and we emphasize an intervention and an engagement on the front lines of people who are impacted by justice systems. And we know all that connects to in terms of violence and other issues in our community. But really, justice is just the front door for us through which we enter. But implicated in this larger idea are all systems of care, this fractured system of care education, healthcare, behavioral health, housing, right? All of which have, to significant extents, failed our village. Folks have failed through those, fallen through the cracks, however we would describe it. Generally, by the time they reach the justice system, right? All these other systems have certainly not been able to, or they haven't been able to navigate them in such a way. We believe that one of the fundamental reasons for that is that the paradigm is such that the village is, we're hopeful recipients. We hope to receive good care, good justice, fair treatment, adequate services. And when we're fortunate to have inspired leadership, sometimes we can receive that. But our premise is that credible messengers and other community actors and the village itself can no longer just be the hopeful recipients of justice and care, but the architects, the designers, right? The leaders of the process and the content of what care looks like in empowering our village. And that's the idea, and that's what credible messengers are doing at this point, not just in justice, but really starting to engage and influence and serve people and impact policy. And I would say the array of the fractured system of care that impacts our village in a profound way.
I love that. Thank you, Clinton. Terrence, I saw you shaking your head. And this notion of moving from hopeful recipients to the architects of this sort of protection for our families and our youth within the village. Where does AMCHIP fall in there? Like, what is AMCHIP's village about shifting dynamics in our communities?
Thanks for the question, Mavis. And I want to also just thank Child Trends for inviting me to participate in this amazing discussion with these distinguished panelists, and thanking the audience for tuning in to hear these ideas and these thoughts. I wanted to situate my contributions to this discussion, sharing a little bit about AMCHIP once more, a little bit about me. AMCHIP, for folks who may not be aware, our members are state government employees sitting in 59 jurisdictions around the country implementing Title V programs. Terrence, what is Title V? So Title V is the oldest public health statute. It was created in 1935 via the Social Security Administration Act. And so it is the only federally funded program that focuses solely on improving the health of mothers and children. So I come to the table also as a father, as a husband, as a uncle, as a son, et cetera, et cetera. And so I want to sort of start at the end, Mavis, to answer your question. And I think about, and what is so wonderful about conversations like this is that I get to sort of think about the sky being the limit in terms of what sort of Black families and Black children should be experiencing our possibilities in the United States. And so I'm just going to rattle off some things. So as many of you who are on the East Coast or in the upper Midwest have experienced this week, foul toxic air coming from wildfires. We know that this is unique for us, but it is not unique for many of the communities around the country. Black individuals not breathing clean air, not able to drink clean water, whether it's in Flint or in Jackson, Mississippi, not having access to great health care, a lack of safety either in their neighborhoods or in the streets at large, in their homes, in the classroom because of gun violence. We want to break this cycle so that Black children and Black family can have access to education and skills building at all levels. Access to mental and emotional health. We want Black children and Black families to be civically, community, culturally, and spiritually engaged. And if you're a person living with a disability, and this often gets missed in these conversations, that our systems, the built environment, infrastructure, and our community see you, we value you. So we want folks thriving, supported, mentored, unfettered, unobstructed to share their gifts. We all have gifts. and we want our gifts to be able to inspire others. And so I'll sort of stop by saying freedom of expression and zero stigma. And what does that mean for Black families and Black children? We want that to be free. We want to all be free from structural racism, misogyny, all forms of gender and sexuality inequality in our nation. And so at the end of the day, my vision is I want Black families and children to feel worthy, to be coveted and treated and cared for like rare jewels. And so I think it's possible if we are all working together and if we continue to have conversations like this to elevate the discourse.
I love this. I love this. So we have, Elisa, a vision of an intact village with access to the kinds of resources that we know help children to thrive. And then Terrence has broadened that to say that each individual and Black children and families in particular to feel as though they are jewels and to be treated as jewels without stigma. Can you talk a little bit about housing and having homes and homelessness and the stigma that's often attached to that and your vision for protective communities where everyone has a home that they can call their own?
Yes, thank you, Mavis. And to the panelists so far, I find myself intoxicated with all the words. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Oh my God, she's calling on me to speak. Oh, wait, okay, focus. Yeah, I just for background, I've worked in homeless services since around 1996. My first job was at an organization in Philadelphia called the People's Emergency Center, which at the time was pretty progressive in the levels of care. So everything from interim, like shelter housing, to permanent housing. We had programs to support children while they were in school, because we know many children that experience homelessness, their education gets disrupted. We had access to healthcare and even parenting, because many people were coming from fragmented communities. And so when I think about what makes a protective community, one of the pieces that kind of pivoted my career into policy was I was finding kind of the next generation was coming back to our organization with their children. So while we were helping people in the moment move from a crisis to permanent housing, we weren't getting to the root cause of what was causing this intergenerational cycle of homelessness. And from the policy perspective, there's a lot of details and some key factors that are contributing to that, which I can talk now or talk later. So, but my vision would be in that village and as architects of that village and with all the qualities that Terrence talked about, access to affordable, safe, and culturally relevant housing. Housing that can accommodate intergenerations, not just kind of the nuclear where it's a mom or dad and the children, but grandma, auntie, niece, or nephews, because we know during our cycles of life, that's always been, at least in my family, when we migrated from Memphis to Chicago to LA, there was always this kind of village idea, and that you accepted kin. Some people we call cousins to this day. I'm like, are they actually related to us, or are they just from the hometown? Or, as situations happen, people, maybe they're hospitalized or incarcerated, premature death. There's always been this practice of adopting, formally or informally, people into our families. And sadly, some of our housing structures and policies prevent that. Some of us may remember the old movie Claudine, where the social worker would come around and a man wasn't allowed in the house if the mom was receiving public assistance. And while some of that's changed in some of our restrictive housing, you can't have guests for more than 14 days. Well, what happens if, a mom has to go into drug rehab for 90 days? What happens to her kids, and how do we prevent them, from going into foster care? So my idea in that village is that we would have culturally relevant, easily accessible, safe housing that's not so much income restricted, because sometimes that people feel trapped. It becomes a disincentive to, improve your economic status, or maybe you want to get married, or your family configuration changes. And oftentimes the housing subsidies are threatened at that point. So it creates more disruption than supporting someone and what is your life purpose and what is your life mission. So I will add that to now. And just why this is also so critical, I think even in the Black community, we don't really understand the overrepresentation of Black folks that are unhoused. Among families, we represent 50% of families nationwide. I was just pulling some stats, I'll just read quickly. In LA, overall, our African-American population, and I'm Los Angeles based, sorry for that. We're about 9% of the total population, but our homelessness rates range between 35 to 40%, depending on the count for the year. Among families compose 19%, so we're mostly a single adult population, but we do have families. And of that, 74% of families experiencing homelessness identify as Black. 45% of those identifying chronically homeless are also Black. So it's a structural economic crisis, and that it's something we have to take on as kind of another front of the human rights agenda that we're all advocating.
Thank you so much, and thank you for those statistics that help us to sort of place this in broader context. And as we talk about the village, and as we talk about these sort of structural barriers to Black children and families thriving, Ron, can you tell us a little bit about COSPOC and education and what you're trying there to do to sort of shift the support and investment in the village?
Surely, and I'm just soaking in all this wisdom and knowledge and that my colleagues are sharing. I mean, I'm just saying, woo, 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 woo. Now, if I had to start over again with the webinars I mentioned to you earlier, Mavis, I would play a song that speaks to what I'm talking about, this protective community. It's called Loving My People by Gary Taylor. Those who may have heard it, it symbolizes what Black joy is, what Black love, Black family, Black spirituality, Black culture. It's all embodied. Black food, and those, like Alicia says, those people who were not your blood relatives, but they were our fictive kin, who could say something to you and you wouldn't take umbrage because it was all part of the village fabric. And school being a center of a lot of these interactions and conversations, I see this protective community as first being, and school being one of those entities in this connected ecosystems. See, because what we're all talking about are things that are abundantly connected in terms of how our village should look. All the services, all the assets that go unnoticed, go untapped, that need to be mapped, because there's jewels, as someone said, I went to Temple University, and Russell Conwell said, there's acres of diamonds. So even though you might live in North Philly, South Philly, West Philly, doesn't matter, it's acres of diamonds. These are places, by the way, these protected communities where OGs can school young Gs and young Gs can school OGs. It's a conversation across generations. And it's a respect across the generations because the baton can be continually passed, right? This is a place where being Black is not a risk. It's an asset. This is the place where freedom dreaming takes place, not spirit murdering. That's my friend, Dr. Bettino Love, who said that. Freedom dreaming takes place, not spirit murdering. Where you can envision anything you want to be and be actualized in that because people believe you. Where school should be the place where parents can feel as though they can go in and feel validated, be agents of change, be part of the educational enterprise, not be threatened, not to be grilled because maybe they come from part of the city was not recognized, but they're being acknowledged for who they are and whose they are, because in fact, they are the child's first teacher. And one of the things that I did just before starting COSBA was to start a project called Starting School Differently. Because in schools, we start school the same old way, usually after the agrarian calendar. And usually, we find out who we are and find out who our students are well into the season. So if Clinton wants to act out, then I'll find out in September about Clinton. But if Clinton is quiet, like Terrence, I might not find out about Terrence's assets until way down the road. But starting school differently is a concept that I felt was important, where parents are centered as the first teacher. So what did we do in school in North Philly? We invited parents back to school, not in September, which is typical, or October, with typical parent conferences, But in July, shortly after school ended, and we sent invitations, and we opened up the gymnasium in these two particular pilot schools that we test drove this project, and we said, this is an invitation where you, your child's first teacher, can share what you know about your child with your child's new teacher. Just think about that paradigm shift. You know, just think about it. If the parents are first 3 words, welcomed into the school setting, they're welcome. And so we welcomed them with refreshments. We had the school set up as a welcoming place. So welcome is the first concept. The second notion, honor. We honored their wisdom, their fund of knowledge that they had, that as a new teacher who's taking your child, I don't have that knowledge. And the third piece, once we welcomed, once we honored, parents joined us in the educational enterprise where they felt validated, felt agency. It's not a complicated concept to do. We could do it tomorrow in every school in Philadelphia, LA, Georgia, no matter where you are. It's the system that has to understand. You know, what I call this is a conspiracy of care. So I'm also advocating that these communities that we're talking about, these beloved communities, where school is not just the center, but is part of the community. Because learning takes place not only in the school as we know traditionally, but in the barbershop, in the bodega, in the beauty parlor, in the laundromat, right? Where OGs and young Gs can connect. So, you know, it's radical love, but it's not a radical notion that can't be put in place tomorrow if we opted to do so. So this protected community would be infused with love, hope, stability, service, gratitude, appreciation, respect, wisdom. And so the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color is about the affirmative social, emotional, cultural, and academic development. The affirmative, because we know that the resident within all these Black boys, from the littlest one to the biggest one, is genius residing in them. So it's up to us as educators to bring that genius out. So, you know, we want to center schools in that place where they're culturally responsive to all children, that the system doesn't get in the way, but helps to show the way. So I'm just excited because this wisdom, the pearls have been dropped so far. I'm just adding my few little nuggets.
Oh, yes, and valuable nuggets those are. I have heard a lot about services, assets, cross-generational conversations, and I love the notion of being Black as an asset and not a risk. So you have all been leaders in your respective fields for quite some time. And what I want to do for our next 20 minutes or so, before we go to the Q&A portion of today's conversation, is for you to sort of talk about your work toward realizing these visions that you have shared with us today. And what are some key challenges that you're facing, right? Because we all want these communities. We know how important they are for Black children and families, and indeed all children and families. Why do we struggle, you know, generally to realize this? And what specific challenges have you faced and how have you addressed them? How are you addressing them? And let's start with Clinton on this particular question.
Thank you, Mavis. And thank you to everyone who's spoken. It's just really been amazing here and inspiring. And so challenges, you know, I would like to go back to when I became Deputy Commissioner of the Probation Department in New York City, right? And so there was this rare opportunity. Hopefully it won't continue to be so rare, and that we'll continue to have people come into systems with a rooted community experience and perspective, right? And commitment. So we came in, the commissioner at that time, Benny Schiraldi, was certainly a way outside of the box thinker. And there was this moment in time where we began to try to implement our values, right? Which was about community engagement, community empowerment. And so we started to develop an RFP ultimately that was designed to fund organizations in the community, right? In New York City, the 7 communities that led the list in incarceration and a whole list of disparities, of course, right? So we focused on those areas. We focused on 16 to 24-year-olds on probation. And the idea, of course, that we were going to invest in those communities and connect to who we now call credible messengers, people with shared life experiences, but also with stories and narratives of restoration and redemption, right? And certainly positioned to make great contributions, as I described before. Well, even within the system itself, right? And we were in charge of it, right? But culture, organizational culture and systems is so powerful. Even when people come in with a different perspective, we all know the classic staff and managers waiting you out until a new mayor comes in or a new appointing official. So culture change was major, and it played out specifically, even in writing the RFP. We would determine that we wouldn't just do the standard, write an RFP, issue a concept paper, put it online, let people respond, because the people we were trying to reach would never know that there was any such thing online. Most of the people we were trying to reach hadn't or really weren't well capacitated to respond and win an application, to win a government grant, right? So we were determined to go to the community and did a series of forums and community centers and churches and various places just to share the idea with people on the ground, to get feedback, to get insight, right? And also to generate some interest and some collaboration so that grassroots organizations could respond. And even internally, we went through struggles with our own procurement department, with our own sort of system, because the system wasn't built to engage and empower grassroots community, right? So we had to kind of build the door that wasn't there to go through it, right? And so that experience, I just wanted to share it as it can apply to this larger idea of challenges in trying to create a not what John McKnight calls the careless society, right? But a care-filled, village and society. When we came to DC in 2015, when I became director of DC's system, we embraced what's been shared here throughout this call today, this idea of love, Martin Luther King's words, that true justice is an act of love in public policy, right? So just changing culture, thinking about funding differently, right? Divesting from our own budget, which was paying to send kids into residential placements, right? And putting that money into the hands of credible messengers in community was a difficult notion for many people, right? And so we're trying to just shift the thinking and shift the learned helplessness on the part of those in power positioned with resources to have the impact, right? There's so much focus on learned helplessness and other issues in the community, and it's real, but it's in the systems as well. So that cultural policy change, right, is real. But as has been said, as Ron said, it's possible, right? Like this is not a moonshot. Like there's practical ways if we have the commitment and then the community buy-in. So community engagement then, not your token engagement, but really creating space for credible messengers, but also for children, for grandmothers, right? For people in the village who've never been in the space, invited to spaces, not enough in our own village, but certainly not in the halls of power of our systems. And so that was one of the things that we did, which was very difficult for many of the 500 employees in our agency, right? Because they saw the community as, again, recipients of whatever brand of care they were given, but not as people empowered to be in the room, right? Listening, contributing, and beginning to impact policy and practice. So I just share all that as, yes, challenges, because it was counterintuitive to many. There wasn't great momentum, right? that we could tap into. We had to build and generate the momentum. But this is the required work, right? It's the step by step, door by door, community by community, family by family, youth by youth, right? Engagement, quality engagement, and then the opening up of space, right? If we're not in positions of power to open the door, then how do we in the village, right? What does the demand and the advocacy look like to get those doors open, right? That's obviously another challenge that I would say, but a necessary one in our walk towards true community wellness and empowerment. There has to be a shift in the paradigm, in the process that opens up doors and creates space for the most impacted people, the village members themselves, to raise their voices, to bring their perspective, and to bring their solutions. So a mouthful, a challenge, but in a very real way, possible. Perhaps not at the scale that we were able to achieve in DC, which was a unique place where we were able to infuse credible messengers into our very fabric of the machine, or at least we began to do so. At the table, impacting policy and practice, inside of the detention center, et cetera, those types of things. But wherever we are, whatever community it is, there is a need, obviously, and I believe an opportunity to address this challenge of shifting the paradigm to a real intentional investment in community, to start not just bringing solutions, but to be the practitioners and deliverers, right, of the care that the village needs.
Absolutely. Terrence, paradigm shift, challenges. What can you sort of add to what Clinton is talking about that cultural shift that has to take place, not only in communities, but in organizations?
Thanks, Mavis. This is like a vitamin B injection, this whole conversation. So I just want to say I'm like soaking this all up. I'm going to sort of riff off of a couple comments. I think Ronald mentioned sort of this concept of sort of being Black as an asset, not a risk. And I think about that quite a bit in my own role as a Black leader of my organization, and how I believe me as a Black man in my organization is an asset, is another way to think through and provide information, is another approach, dare I say, to thinking about and sort of workshopping issues that are impacting our families. And so I think about, in the maternal and child health space in particular, really starting scaling up equity. So what are the challenges and the key ingredients there? So I'm just going to focus in on two. I think some of our biggest challenges have been in the sort of policy arena, and also in workforce. And I'll start with workforce first, actually. Some real challenges that we have seen even pre-COVID were really sort of situated in sort of retirements, folks sort of leaving the field, but also there not being a sort of continuous pipeline of individuals that are sort of working in the maternal and child health space. And so workforce challenges related to there quite simply not being sort of Black people engaged at every level in infrastructure. I know that is not a surprise to anybody on this call, whether it's panelists or folks listening in, but to the extent that we are able to sort of usurp that challenge, we have to sort of really laser focus in on our workforce. We have to be training up, creating doors of opportunity at all levels for folks to sort of join in terms of problem solving. The other area that I think is sort of a key challenge, also not going to be a surprise to any listener, is just policy. And when I say policy, I talk about policy as in big P policy, things happening at the sort of national level, at the state level, little p policies, things that Clinton has already mentioned, and that have been mentioned related to sort of housing. Elisa's mentioned there. But I'll focus in particular around just some key examples. policies, laws and policies that undo our progress. I think about our CHIP, our Children Health Insurance Program, purging individuals from Medicaid programs when the data, generations of data show how important and sort of noteworthy sort of these programs are to our populations. The sort of the latest and the greatest around erecting work requirements, knowing that is steeped in structural racism, and that is an approach to divest from our communities. And so these are things that I think we are up against that are challenging. These are just two of many areas, but I would offer up as an antidote to both of those is sharing power with communities. And so that's something that we've been talking about and working through in our organization quite a bit. Knowing that listening to and meaningfully engaging communities is an antidote to all of these problems. Many times in governments, particularly at the state level and hostile state environments, communities can do and say things that folks can't in state government. And so really Black community are the antidote to many of these problems and can be leveraged to a fuller potential in terms of remedy. And so those are just a few things I thought I would offer up in terms of challenges, but also antidotes.
Love it. I love that notion of the community, and so much can rest with creating that space for the community. Elisa, when you think about challenges that you've seen in your work around housing accessibility for all people, what are some of the challenges and ways that you've tried to address that?
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you all. When I think about just some of the conversation, I remember it wasn't that long ago. I remember asking questions in policy meetings, like, why are so many Black people experiencing homelessness? Why is it disproportionality? And it was like, oh, we don't talk about race in homeless services. So my first piece would be that we have to unapologetically center on race. And it doesn't mean that we're just advocating for Black people or this group or that, but it's like when we can start to understand how to collect data and disaggregate it by race, and we really start to understand how do systems move and what are those pinpoints of where different racial or gender or age or disability, whatever the identities are, fall out or are successful, we can start to create better care. And some of that may be, I agree with Clinton, less government sponsored system, more community-based sponsored system, but we'll start to understand what are the needs and how are we failing or supporting people. We see that in housing, for instance, while African Americans, we tend to get placed into housing, individuals fall out at double the rate of other groups and families nearly 4 times the rate of other groups. So we're not, although we're placing people in a structure, we're not helping create home and center into home. And the other part I would say is the engagement with people, lived expertise, lived experience, however closest proximity, however you want to define them, is critical. I think it's so interesting, while some of our national leaders are on the bullhorn, trying to roll back so many affirming policies, at least at local government, there's such a mistrust level that I'm seeing a window of opportunity where it's almost like they don't know what to do. So there's this more willingness to reach out to community, and we have to be ready to catch that as both education. So just a quick example, we stood up a refresh spot, which was toilets and showers in our Skid Row community, one of the largest unhoused communities in the nation, majority African American. If this were impacting any other race in the country, we would not stand for this, but it is, the structural racism is there. So we stood up this hygiene center. It took 8 months of planning with community, but they designed everything from public safety to who would be the social service provider to having music, places for cell phone charging, pets, harm reduction, materials, all of that. And it took time. A lot of it was, I learned from my time in Philadelphia, it's better to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. So a lot of it was after work, going to the grocery store, buying some chicken dinners, whatever it took, to make it happen, and really community for support. But once it happened, it now is a model, and we see it replicated across. And so sometimes in our roles, we can't be comfortable you know, just because we're salaried or whatever, we have to be advocates and we have to learn to take risk. And that I agree with Terrence, it is that relationship with community, because sometimes you can take it so far, but you need the community to show up at that city council meeting or that budget hearing or write a letter of editorial to the newspaper. And so it's this like cross training in the relationship of helping community understand how decisions are made in public policy systems, so they have the tools, and then getting out the way so that now that they have the tools, they can advance forward. I think I was trying to write some quick notes. Oh, just the last point, what am I doing now? In this kind of transition, again, where that window of opportunity is open, I feel very fortunate. One, working on 2 projects. One is sponsored by a local county. One is more of a local, a funder. In both, the key is recognizing past policies that created harms that have led to the conditions today. And so while one is developing healthcare clinics and, you know, harm reduction centers and all, another one is developing affordable housing for people returning from prison and from the county jail and the criminal justice system. We are able to acknowledge the land stolen. I want to give just acknowledgement to our American Indian, Alaska Native brothers and sisters, and really honoring that even when we talk about development on land, that we're doing it in solidarity with those communities. There are other groups here in LA. We experienced like Chinese massacres at the turn of the 1800s into the 1900s, Native American slavery, the Latino forced immigration, even of citizens. And, you know, we see that continue to happen. And so I just love the ability that, yes, while we're kind of talking about future progress, we're able to go back and provide some healing to some of the atrocities that happen on the actual spaces of where it is and give that acknowledgement. So I think that's important.
Thank you so much, Elisa. Ron, we're talking about empowerment of the community and how we can, and that's one way to address the challenges that we face. Can you talk a little bit about challenges in your various roles in education and how you've been able to address them?
Yeah, challenges and opportunities. And, you know, my colleagues who've been speaking before, I tell you, you guys are rocking. I'm just telling, I'm just soaking this all in like a sponge. But, you know, I'll say this, that someone told me years ago when I started being a principal, one of my teachers said, you know, Mr. Walker, the things you may try to do, but the system never changes. It just bends a little bit. And you can almost believe that to be true. But I believe that we can and we are making impact, and we must continue to make impact on the system, because as Clinton said, so much of this is mindset. Well, this is the way we used to do it, you know. And so when I was a principal in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I said, well, the way we used to do it ain't going to be the way we're going to do it. So I held a faculty meeting in the community, not in the school, in the community, in the project. You know, because if this is the way we used to do it and we didn't get all these parents, let's go to where the parents are. So again, I think it takes a certain level of conscious risk taking, you know, because we can talk the talk, and we've talked the talk for years, but we see visible the problems. And we so the other thing that I tried was a concept that I called community faculty. See, I knew who was in my building who was a faculty member, right? And I could go to them and this and that, but my crossing guard was a faculty member. The person who worked in my cafeteria was a faculty member. The barber around the corner was a faculty member. Now, I told them, I said, although you're not minted with a credential, but a BA, or MA, or MED, whatever, you are credentialed because you know the community. You know the young people will come in through your barbershop, through your beauty parlor, through your, you know, through your store. So why don't you become a member of my community faculty? So I'm saying, you know, thinking out the box. I don't want to reside in the box. Well, we create a, you know, a box is there. We can either sit in it, you know, and say we wish we did or not. Now, Brother Clinton mentioned John McKnight and Kretzman, who I've met. Both those gentlemen, they have a wonderful, amazing book that's dated 1990, thereabouts, called Building Community from the Inside Out. You know, and then again, we got to go back to the things that are residing within our reach. Because as we know, the challenge is money, right? Nonprofits, you know, I have to sometimes and please and so forth, I have to show you this and that until I come into the funders who see the understand what I'm trying to do to break the cycle of illiteracy or ignorance or cultural deprivation. So we've been graced with some good, understandable funders, changing policy. You know, I had a policymaker again at the school board level, who said one day near the end of school, Mr. Walker, I'm going to send my niece to your school. Now, I had already known through my ground level work that the niece couldn't teach her way out of paper bag. And so, because I was working on this concept of extended community and the community faculty, of course, I spread the word. And I said, okay, you can send her if you want, but you may have some reaction. And, you know, after the parents spoke their mind, she didn't come, by the way. So again, you know, and maybe because I'm at a certain age, you know, I'm 76 years old. And so I believe now more than ever that it's time to really do what we need to do for our people. And that same, it's a book, it's dated, that same concept of being Black is not a risk factor by the National Black Child Development Institute, 2013. They also have a poem, which is, what shall I tell my children who are Black? And if you may indulge me, this is a short one. What can I do to give him strength that he may come through life's adversities as a whole human being unwarped and human in the world of biased laws and inhuman practices, that he might survive? And survive he must. For who knows, perhaps this Black child here bears the genius to discover the cure for cancer or to chart the course for exploration of the universe. So he must survive for the good of all humanity. I've got to fight on that behalf. See what I'm saying? That is the mission of education. So I'll have agile learners, not learners who are just reciting, regurgitating, but agile in their thinking, creative, innovators, game changers. And I believe that that's the mindset we have to go in front of the people we're working with, our constituency. And when I speak to teachers, before I close my remarks, I said, where are my liberators? Do I have any liberators in the house? Because the act of educating for liberation is different from schooling for compliance. Now, if anybody who's listening, you know the difference. Schooling for compliance, just fill in the blank. They don't have to think. Education for liberation is a whole new scene. So that's what we're doing. And one of the other things we're doing with our work is creating a rite of passage agenda. And we're working with men in the community. We've done this for 14 years, where we're now working with the men who want to be who are the credible messengers that Clinton's talked about, to put them through our traditional rite of passage, our African-centered rite of passage program, so that they can face and deal with the many traumas that we as Black men face. And so we're moving them from trauma to triumph, so that then they'll be better able to be those agents of change, taking young men, young Black men, boys, through a rite of passage program. That program we call DRUM, Developing Rituals, Understanding Manhood. And one of the things we say as a mantra, I just repeat it real quick, minute by minute, hour by hour, when you know your story, you know your power, right? And we also say, sharpen your eyes, tune your ears, so you know what you see, understand what you hear. So we give these aspirations to our young men and to the men who work with the young men.
It's beautiful. And, you know, Amanda, we know that what Ron is talking about, this education for liberation, this schooling for liberation, takes place not only in school buildings, but also in these community sites that Rebuild is trying to restore in communities. Tell us a little bit about the challenges and how you've been able to address those before we go to our audience for some questions from them as well.
So it is very hard for me to follow up after
I
Mr.
know.
Walker because I
I'm like, wow, I'm so glad that I'm
too
not
many gems, too many gems.
following Ron,
So,
but you got it.
whew. So I'll speak from the I'll start from the barriers and the challenges that I'm facing in community engagement, because whenever there's a big new something that the city is trying to do, or anyone, nonprofits, public service trying to do, you got to have strong community engagement. But that is the beginning and also has to continue all the way through in the work, right? And looking at the capital investment is only one portion, right? That's about reinvesting into community, has to also come with transparency, accountability. As a former educator, I look at really trying to make sure that knowledge transfer about how local government works, that I'm educating in our public meetings about where did the funding come from? What are the line items? Why can't we spend the dollars on this? How is inflation impacting this? Because when you know that the community deserves triple the budget that we have, and 400 million sounds like a lot, but I'm telling you right now, based on what we faced, we could use double, triple the money for what the sites need. But I have to sit down most of the time at the feet of my elders as I walk into a lot of the communities where folks have served on the advisory council, on the friends group. They have been there through the years of disinvestment. And I mean, they hold me to task about what is the city going to deliver for us? Because we've had broken promises, we've, been kept out, we told this was coming, it's not coming. But I appreciate that there is still then a willingness to work with us. And a big part of what Rebuild in its legislation, was intentional around diversity in contracting. Community engagement was a part of the legislation, and the specific sites being targeted to, equitable distribution across the city. But with that legislative mandate on community engagement, we're really hoping to make a shift in how the city does infrastructure investment, where we're not just going in and dropping the same playground, into every site. We really sit down, we talk to the kids, we're customizing the equipment, the materials, we're reshaping the layout for the vision of what do people want to do in the center. A lot of the rec centers we're hearing, it's not just, athletics and basketball, but it is all these other community services and programs. So we're reshaping rooms to be multi-purpose space. But, the stories we hear sometimes is that, folks have had baby showers, repasses, like full life of the community is happening in our rec centers and community spaces. So we're learning so much, I think, as the city about how to rebuild and reinvest these sites in a way that I have to challenge my architecture and landscape teams all the time. Well, I take, our public meeting feedback and have a very robust process to say, this is what we heard from the community. How is it showing up in these drawings? And fact checking ourselves and really trying to create a more template and model, a process that can be replicated for other infrastructure investments. We created a toolkit called the Playbook for all of our community partners who are also helping us to lead public outreach. So they have those resources at their fingertips to make sure that we bring out those floor plans, those landscape designs. They, have a real deep exchange, and they're seeing each step of the process. And, we're really doing it with community, not just for or at them. So, those are the ways we're trying to overcome it. I think, building the trust and the transparency, it takes effort because it has been a long time coming is mostly what we hear. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that this is a wonderful way to transition. You all have been so eloquent in talking about building protective communities means centering the communities in that process. And so I'm going to ask Megan, I have not been looking at the chat box, but Megan, do we have any questions from our audience for the panelists here today?
Yeah, maybe we do. Let me pull them up right now.
Okay, so let's take the next, let's say 13 minutes, 10 to 10 minutes or so, 10 to 12 minutes, just to get some of those questions to our panelists. And panelists, if it really resonates with you, feel free to jump in there. And Megan, maybe we can get to maybe 4 to 5 of those questions if possible.
Yeah, if people can contribute a few more. So the first one is specifically called out for Ron. Could you share some of the outcomes or impact that you observed or that teachers, students, and families have shared after having the opportunity to connect with one another and build stronger relationships in service to their students?
Great and important question. I think the most important thing that we have seen and beginning to measure through some evaluations and feedback is the level of trust, relational trust that has grown. Dr. James Comer was a mentor elder who used to always talk about the importance of relationships, you know, and so it's been foundational, and we've seen that grow. We've seen school leaders begin to adjust their leadership in the way they reach out to parents and to their staff. There's a notion of leading from the balcony and leading from the dance floor. And too often, some leaders in the past have just been leading from the balcony, have a good vision, looking far, but they don't know how to dance. You know, they don't know how to mix with the people. And so through some of the leadership training we've been doing, we have, you know, occasions where school leaders are going out to the community, more welcoming, using the concept of welcome, honor, and join more. And again, when that happens, we're seeing the increase in student engagement with their courses. Our Rite of Passage program, we worked in the city of Philadelphia from 2010 to 2014, working with seven high schools. And the evidence of that was young men who were referred to the program, the Rite of Passage program, because of discipline and fighting and overzealous behavior. But that work we were doing, engaging them with, again, a kind of a credible messenger, a mentor, Rite of Passage facilitator, was helping them to see who they could be, who they can be. And so we saw reductions in suspensions and fighting. And to this day, the only reason why that program is not going on, because in 2014, for those who know Philadelphia, the school district went belly up. And I told the superintendent, I said, well, why? If you got to go hat in hand and beg for money on the street, why would you let a program go down the tubes that was really working to change the narrative of black males? So, you know, we see this evidence, even those young men who have graduated, who are out from high school, who have come back, they're now parents themselves. They share the evidence of being in this restorative circles, this rite of passage circles, where there's trust, there's cultural awareness. We've seen a growth in that. Understanding who you are can define what you will be. So a lot of evidence on that. If you go to Coast Block website, you can find a little bit more about who we are, what we do with that. Thanks for the question.
Yes, thank you. Another one, and this isn't directed at anyone specific, so please feel free to jump in. How can we fund investments in community-led care, especially for mental health supports? Minnesota promoted several proposals to legislator for community-led care for mental health and well-being. Despite a tremendously historic legislative session, those things were not passed.
I can maybe get us started on this question as a self-proclaimed policy nerd. I really do think the broader message around efforts at the local and the state level around sort of paramount legislation is, if you don't win the battle the first time, you have to go back to the well, you have to start again. And so the importance of building champions, legislative champions, I think is so incredibly important. Really sort of grooming champions within a particular jurisdiction, expanding the concentric circles of champions, getting buy-in, continuing to bring community voices into the fold in terms of advocacy. So training vertically and horizontally across our communities, ensuring that folks are sort of prepared and have the messages and can speak authentically to their stories and what is happening within their communities, I think is important. And then doing sort of advocacy visits en masse, letting legislators see the voting block, see the accountability line, if you will. And so I think that there are sort of, while this may not have succeeded this time, it sounds as though now that it's been introduced, it's one of those things I like to say, it's unstoppable. Once you start something like this, we've seen it. It took us 80 years to pass the Affordable Care Act, right? And so I think it's one of those things where it's just like you have to just keep at it, and keep refining, keep sharpening, keep at it.
Do we have any other panelists that want to jump in there about, Terrence talked about creating those champions and really nurturing those champions. Do you have any experience with that? Finding legislators who really can become partners in this work?
I had a different angle or response,
Okay.
not
Yeah,
exactly
absolutely.
in regards to that level of advocacy, which is obviously like really critical. I just wanted to just briefly mention, though, again, consistent with this idea of credible messenger or impacted people or people rooted in community. One of the things that we've seen and are beginning to invest more in terms of training and development and support is the tremendous impact that credible messengers and community rooted folks have had in both destigmatizing the idea of behavioral health wellness, right? And of course, the stigma and the aversion to that area of care is for a lot of good reasons in terms of what's happened in our communities over medicalizing our children and et cetera. But with that said, the message of credible messengers, both sort of spoken but demonstrated in their own walk, their own pathway, is that we deserve to be well, right? And we have suffered tremendous multi-generational trauma and oppression, right? So there's reasons for what we're suffering in terms of behavioral health challenges, depression, et cetera. But like we deserve it, and that we should and must access care, culturally appropriate care, right? The type of care that speaks to us and really promotes healing, but that really bridging a divide and literally and figuratively walking with people, sort of co-navigating a process to where they can begin to access and demand and to some extent define and connect to our leaders in that space, in this space, to get the kind of care that our people need. So anyway, I just wanted to say, like, we know there's a huge divide in the community around that particular issue and others, but I think the answer again is in the community. How do we bridge that divide? And credible messengers and others I think are really important and continue to be an important part of that.
I love that. From the top down and the bottom up, we sort of join in the middle to make change. It's great.
Can I just add one?
Yes, absolutely.
I know sometimes it's hard to change at that state level. Like like Terrence said, you have to be consistent and steadfast. We have found success at our county of finding those trusted messengers within the department of our county behavioral health system that has really, created a peer resource center that even did some of the state advocacy to fund peer support specialists as part of the care team, so that there's part of the healthcare system reimbursement. The other thing is sometimes in defining what does wellness mean for your community, like our arts department within the county started funding wellness activities to support mental wellness. So if it were dance or like Ronald's drum program or things like that. So depending on what it is that you're trying to get funded, if you can break it down sometimes into smaller projects, and as Terrence said, build those concentric circles, you may at least get some funding going for piloting. So then you get some data and then you find other champions that could also go to the state with you to be that voice, and definitely include people with lived experience, their parents, all of that is so important too.
Great. Megan, I believe we have time for one more question.
Good, but we only have one more, and it's a good one. So first off, she starts with, y'all, you're truly inspiring and amazing. Thank you so much. The question is there any research broadly defined that you think still needs to advance this work? Or excuse me, is still needed to advance this work?
Well, I have a research wish. It's, it's not so broad. It's really centering on the Black experience and where do we go? And for me, it's what happened between, kind of post-integration between like 1970 to about 20, so now you could even say around, as we talk about these community-led models and inclusion of family, sorry, loud cars in the background, inclusion of family. How do we rebuild the capacity of families and communities to receive this work? And so, for instance, I'm only a generation away from millennials or, 2 generations from Gen X. To us, knowing who your family, your grandparents, like all of that was so important. But I run into youth now who don't know their grandparents, because of moving away, as economically advanced, we don't want to go back to where we came from, or just economic situations, unresolved intergenerational trauma. And I don't know, like, if it's mending that has to happen, or if it's kind of the way it is. So kind of how do you reconstruct so we don't depend so much on systems? Like, I feel like systems have managed their way into the gap. And I want to reduce that gap and bring us back to more capacity. And I just don't have enough information, but I know there's a lot of pain when we talk about rebuilding families or family connections. And I can imagine that extends out into community, because if you don't trust your family has betrayed you. How are you going to trust that community leader, maybe that trusted messenger, but like to get to scale of where we can see changes. So that's just kind of my wish.
I would piggyback from Lisa. I totally agree with what you said. I was on an earlier webinar that was hosted by the organization called the Payne Center for Social Justice, and Burke Black Educators Research something center out of New York City. But they're focusing on the history of Black education over the past 100 years. Because oftentimes we think of our education being started when slavery ended. And so you can really go back past, but it really goes back beyond that. And so while schools after the Civil War were started, Reconstruction, Black people were learning well before then. I mean, we were learning, we were the center of learning. We brought learning here, right? And we often marginalize and minimize ourselves because we don't know that history. That literally everything that was created, it was interesting that the Greeks and the Romans went to Africa to learn about, certain things. Pythagoras went there. All these things are things that they want to squeeze out of education right now. So I think that's critically important research. And the other bit of research too is they say the highest period of Black satisfaction over our, the past 20 years was when President Obama was president. No surprise. The state of Black, I forget what they called it today, but just knowing that it's much more that we need to do to reconnect ourselves and to our community, that my colleagues were saying today. So I'm not a researcher, but I appreciate it.
So thank you so much, Megan, for sharing those questions from our audience. The last one really sort of preempted the way we're going to close out this session. And again, I can't thank you all enough for just bringing your wisdom and your enthusiasm and your commitment to this conversation. I'm going to ask each of you in maybe 30 seconds, so a very short answer. What can, we have an audience that includes researchers and advocates and service providers and others in the community. So if you could think, just choose one of those groups, and if you can tell us a little bit about what they can do to support your work. In 30 seconds or more, I would like each of you to sort of share that for our audience as we leave and as we close out this session. I believe we can begin, let's just begin with Ron, then Amanda, then we'll sort of loop to Elisa, Terrence, and then end with Clinton. So Ron, one thing, advocates, policymakers.
Just continue to build the research around this notion that I said earlier that being Black is not a deficit. Just continue to really lift up the assets, the qualities that Black boys, Black genius within these Black boys and Black young men have. Just continue to lift that up in different ways.
Thank you. Amanda.
I would like to say we need more money. And that's a big call out to foundations. The William Penn Foundation made their largest gift, a historic match of $100 million to match the city of Philadelphia to do these projects. And so more cities, more foundations across the country meeting and matching their local governments to, when we're cash strapped, smaller budgets, don't have capital budgets, everybody can be a part of this. So definitely want to see more of that. Because I think when it comes to research, one of the things I would love to kind of know, especially as we finish our first 72 sites, I think about it from the perspective, if we're trying to build Wakanda, right? We're trying to build up neighborhoods, right? What does the park or the rec center in Wakanda really look like? And if it takes us to build that, really reimagining, at one point we had 21st century libraries was an initiative that we had here in Philadelphia. I'm talking next millennia libraries, right? So think about that and just researching what would that look like?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I love, you've given us a great image there, Amanda. Elisa, 30 seconds. What could policymakers, practitioners, researchers?
I'm going to target this to the researchers in the room. Help us develop trauma-informed, life-affirming data collection methods so that we can know and also that capture our intersectionality. So not just on Black people, not just on women, on Black women who are 25, or, really capture our intersectional identities, and not for a death sentence, but that are life affirming. So again, we can continue to make improvements.
I love that. Thank you. Clinton. Oh, I'm sorry, Terrence. Terrence next.
Oh, no worries. I just building on the research theme. For anyone that's listening, feel free to go to AmChip's website. We have our strategic plan completed. I believe the link was made available. And I would say the area that I would like to hover over is partnerships. We are very interested in building and developing interdisciplinary partnerships that are durable, where we don't always have to be the expert in every issue, but we have others that are, so that we can align our work together and really amplify each other's voices. And, just echoing some comments that have been made about we deserve to be well. I just want to sort of leave us with the Octavia Butler sort of quote, which is, "So be it, see to it." And I believe that the way we do it is via partnerships.
I love that. I'm writing all of this down. And Clinton, could you close us out?
Yes, just to build on all that's been said, and to point to policymakers, funders, and researchers to collaborate, to invest in, I think, a redefinition or expansion of what's commonly referred to as evidence and evidence-based, and start to infuse, as you, Mavis, and Child Trends and others are leading, participatory action research, building the narrative from the perspective of those who are impacted, whose hands are on it, whose lives are the substance of it, and to challenge, I think, some of the established notions of what's considered to be true or evidence, and expand that notion to really reflect the experience of the people being impacted in our overall village. And I think that's a collective effort, but one that's necessary. And I'm super excited to know you and to have met all of you here, because I know we have the people who could do it. We can do it, and we're doing it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you again. Thank the audience. Thank the panelists. You are wonderful. I wish you a happy, safe, and restorative Juneteenth weekend. And for all the fathers or father figures in the audience or on the panel, have a very happy Father's Day. Thank you all so much. Till next year. Bye-bye.
Thank you.